at least the early 2010s, DEI statements have become ubiquitous in academic hiring, promotion, and grant applications, particularly at elite universities like Harvard. Researchers dependent on federal funding, for example, $37 billion from the National Institutes of Health in 2024, have dutifully complied, often prioritizing ideological conformity and, let's say, cowardice over merit and bravery, for sure. And so, like, I started to see this about in 2010, where I would write a grant application for the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, or the Medical Research Council, or Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. This was in Canada, but similar entities exist in the US. And I'd have to write out an ideological belief statement. And I thought, no bloody way am I doing that. There's no excuse for that. It's completely irrelevant to my commitment to seek truth as a scientist and a researcher, and to teach truth to my students. And so I thought, to hell with you. You need me more than I need you. Now, did that spread? No. The researchers, pretty much to a man and woman, rolled over and let the progressives have their way with them. And there's no excuse for this, and there's no whining about this now. You made your goddamn bed. It's time to lie in it. So, let's document some of that. Early 2010s, DEI statements emerged as optional components in faculty hiring at universities like UC Berkeley, surprise, surprise, spreading to Ivy League schools by 2015. By 2018, remember they started out as optional, right? Well, maybe we should have some more people of color as our research assistants or our professors. Well, let me tell you, I sat on a lot of hiring committees as a professor, and any person of color who is vaguely qualified, and I mean vaguely, is going to be snapped up by a university so fast you can't bloody well believe it. And that's been the case at least since the 1980s. And so if universities have been unable to flesh out their quota of racial, sexual identity, and gender proportions, it's because qualified people in those categories simply do not exist. Now, no one will say that, but we'll get back to that when we discuss McGill in Canada. And that, I'm telling you, this is the straight truth. I sat on lots of hiring committees. If there was anyone who vaguely smacked of minority status in any possible manner, and they were even remotely qualified, they were prioritized over every other candidate. And that goes back all the way to the 1990s, at least. Probably before that. There's probably no institutions in the world that have tried to be more inclusive without sacrificing merit until recently than the universities. And if they're not able to do it, and you think that's a consequence of systemic racism, well, then you're one of those neo-Marxist types that really we shouldn't be contending with anymore, especially not in the universities. Okay, so back to, and we notice as well, DEI statements are optional in 2010, but by 2018, they're mandatory. And then it gets worse than that. They're not only mandatory, but they're the criteria by which faculty are now hired. And so we'll get to that, especially in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences and medical schools. So you remember that, by the way, all you people, when you go see a newly graduated doctor, you have no bloody idea if they were selected for merit or on some other basis, and you have no idea if the program that they were trained in, even at an august institution, evaluated them without prejudice for their merit. So you remember that when you put your sick kid in their hands. I would be very careful about that if I was you. In fact, I am. Post-2020, following George Floyd's death, DEI requirements intensified. It isn't exactly obvious to me that the events surrounding George Floyd were of sufficient historical importance, all things considered, so that the world's greatest universities should have reconstituted their promotion, hiring, selection, and publishing criteria. But that is what they did, instead of having like an iota of courage. Harvard FAS, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, mandated DEI statements for all tenure-track hires, evaluating candidates' commitment to diversity alongside scholarship. Well, alongside or prior? We'll get to that too. Grant applications to NIH and NSF increasingly required DEI plans, with 80% of major research universities adopting similar mandates by 2023. Okay, so understand that. So now You have to hire on the basis of race and sex and gender and sexual identity. And you have to promote and you have to publish on those bases. Okay, and so, well, what does that mean? It means that you've stopped using truth, quality, and merit as criteria. So why the hell should you be getting any money? Now, let me make another case here. And I know this to be true as well. So I talked to a lot of professors at Stanford, especially at the Hoover Institute, And there were some people in Stanford, like Jay Bhattacharya, who's doing quite well now in the new Trump administration, just as case in point, who stood up against the woke mob in the mid-2010s. And Jay suffered pretty tremendously because of that, but he had a few colleagues around him who stuck by him. And you know, it's possible for the woke mob cancellation psychopaths to go after people one by one really successfully. But if there's like 5 of you and you're major researchers and stellar professors and you band together, they haven't got a hope. And so how many places did that happen at? Well, it happened at Stanford. That's one place. And that was also a place, by the way, because it had the Hoover Institute, that had a place where there were actually some classic liberals and conservatives. It's not like Jay Bhattacharya is some kind of Nazi. You know, first of all, he's a person of color. And so, you know, obviously should be credited with that for what it's worth. But what am I making a case for here? If 5 of my colleagues with my kind of research background or better had stood together at 3 universities and told the DEI mob to go to hell, none of this would have happened. And that didn't happen. And that's a illustration of a depth of cowardice that's so profound that it still shocks me. And those of you listening and watching should have no sympathy whatsoever for what the people that you support involuntarily, essentially, with your tax dollars, did with the responsibility that had been vouchsafed to them, for example, with their tax-exempt status. And they bloody well know it too. Harvard, Columbia, the major league universities, they're running scared because they know they put their foot into it, their foot in it. And they did. They deserve whatever's coming to them. And, you know, in terms of reforming them, how are you going to reform them? 75% of them are progressive. If the problem is the disproportion of progressive ideology and the pathology of that ideology, especially with regards to racial, sexual preference, classification, and the proclivity to do that, what are you going to do? You're going to keep those people? And what, give them new positions? Give them name their institution something different? The radical left is very slippery with language, to say the least. Property is theft. There's a classic example. You have the same players with different names, they're going to play the same games. I see no way that the universities currently are salvageable. Hence, for example, Peterson Academy. So, major research institutions require DEI mandates, 80% of them by 2023. 90% of faculty at elite institutions, 90%, include DEI statements and applications. So that means if you're an applicant to be a junior faculty member, and Lord forgive you, Lord preserve you if you're not in one of the protected categories, that's for sure. You can just forget it, right? And so, and that's dead serious. The probability that you can be hired at a university if you're a young, white, male graduate it's vanishingly small. And I know this from personal experience because I had stellar students who were in those categories who couldn't get jobs. So it's absolutely the case. At Harvard, DEI criteria influenced hiring in 70% of faculty of arts and sciences searches by 2022 per internal reports. Promotion and tenure decisions also weighed DEI contributions. So that's not only a DEI contribution, a statement is not only your willingness to proclaim allegiance to an ideological doctrine, so a belief statement, it's also an indication of your willingness to sell your soul to the devil because you've been told to by an administrator. Right. So make no mistake about this. This isn't merely political corruption, analyzed from a conservative perspective. I don't like those progressives. I don't like the progressives, the Marxists. I think they're appalling to the core and that their doctrine is genocidally murderous and unforgivable, in the same category, by the way, as the Nazi doctrines in the extreme. But even independent of that, I think the willingness of faculty members and researchers to pen these bloody statements, to say that those were their words, to sign themselves to those beliefs, indicates that they don't deserve public support at all. And I don't think you should send your children to those institutions. They're gone, just like CNN, just like MSNBC, and just